Hi, everybody. Welcome to this December Y Canterbury debut panel, which I think the titles of these panels have just gotten more chaotic as they've gone on. I've resorted to just naming them by the month that they're being filmed in. So that's, a general indicator of my state of mind. But if you didn't know who I am, my name is Lily. I'm the face behind Utopia State of Mind. And today we're going to be chatting with these fantastic YA debuts. And if you have any questions, then definitely put them in the chat and I will remember to go back to them later on in the panel. But now I'm going to have the authors introduce themselves, tell us about their books, and then we'll just jump into some questions that I had when I was reading all the books for the panels.
So I'm Alima Omatoni, and I'm the author of Everyone's Thinking It, which is a YA contemporary sort of dark academia novel with a mystery thrown in there. And yeah, we describe it as sort of a loose reimagining of A Midsummer Night's Dream if Shakespeare grew up watching Mean Girls and Dear White People. So it's about these two cousins, Ianu and Kiton, and they're at an elite boarding school in England, and things sort of go awry the week before the Valentine's Day ball, when everyone's sort of secrets kind of get released and things go a bit crazy, I guess. Well, wild.
Hi, I am Olivia Worley, and I'm the author of People to Follow, which is a young adult thriller. I pitched it as And Then There None by meets influencers. So 10 teenage influencers who go to a remote private island in the middle of the Caribbean to film what they think is a new reality show about unplugging from their phones, going likes. Of course, no one is there to actually unplug. They're there to like revamp their image or get some new followers. But then, of course, things start to go horribly, horribly very quickly. The producers leave them stranded, and then one of the influencers turns up dead. And pretty soon, someone calling themselves their anonymous sponsor begins threatening to expose their darkest secrets. And the influencers have to figure out who has lured them to this island and why, before the killers are all canceled. So yeah, that's People to Follow.
Hi, I'm Amy Goldsmith, and I am the author of Those Who Drown. And my book, excuse me, is about a girl called Liv who gets the opportunity to go on a cruise around the world. And while she's on board, she falls out with her best friend the very first night. And the next day he's disappeared, and everybody tells her that he's sick and he is in quarantine. But the more she kind of, investigates what's happened to him, the more strange things are revealed. And it's kind of like the Wicker Man on a cruise ship. So, yeah.
Yeah, as I was making questions, I didn't because of all the covers and how different they are, I didn't realize that they'd have so many like thriller vibes all together until I was finished reading them and I was like, wow, actually they merged really well for this panel. But the first question I want to start off with, which I'm sure you all have like answered 5 million times by this point, is just the very basic question about being a debut. And if you could tell us about the inspiration behind your book and also your journey to release. So, Lima, do you want to start?
So inspiration wise, I wrote this in 2020 while I was at uni. So it was a difficult time, as we all know what 2020 was like. And I sort of needed an escape. So a huge part of my inspiration was just kind of getting into a place of like just a little, yeah, an escape somewhere outside of the actual realities of everything that was going on and how much I needed to do. So a huge draw for me were kind of my, the classic 90s and noughties teen films. 10 Things I Hate About You, Mean Girls, Clueless, those kinds of things. And because I went to boarding school, I was like, okay, that would be a nice sort of bottle place that is kind of in itself away from reality, right? Because it's away from home. So inspiration wise, it kind of came from that sort of very, I guess, emotional place of being like, I need somewhere to go. And then things kind of built up as I discovered more about the main characters and the sort of themes that I wanted to explore. And that's when things like Midsummer came in, because I didn't want to do an exact retelling. I decided on a reimagining because for me, it was about exploring specific themes about love and desirability and what that means, especially when you have two Black girls at the center of the story. In terms of journey to debut, both fast and slow. It was very much there's that joke about publishing that everything is really slow until it's not, until suddenly you have so much to do and a lot's going on. But it was a really chill, and it was actually kind of a chill time just because of the people that I had around me, my agent, my editors. Shout out to them. So yeah.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about the inspiration for people to follow, which also I feel like I put some books behind me. They're kind of far away. This is what it looks like. Yeah, also similarly, I think for a lot of us, like 2023 debuts, books were like pandemic books, which makes sense with the timeline of how publishing usually works. But for me, I had also just college in 2020 with a so fun because I was home not able to really do the thing that I had just been training for 4 years to do. And kind of I feel like a lot of people during the pandemic, I really lost myself in like social media and reality TV and anything to sort of just like turn my brain off and like not have to engage with what was going on around me. And at the same time, I was also rediscovering my love of Agatha Christie, particularly And Then There Were None, which is the loose inspiration for this book. And I started to kind of just think about like how fun it would be to combine something like the isolated murder mystery setting of And Then There Were None, where everyone is, dying one by one, with like the very high stakes drama and like secrets of reality TV and influencer culture. So that is where the idea came from. In terms of my path to publication, I started working on this book when I was part of a mentorship program called Author Mentor Match, which I believe is not actually really around anymore. But I'd actually submitted to that program with a completely different book. And my mentor, Alexa Dunn, kind of asked what else I had been working on, and I threw out like, oh, I have this idea about influencers. It's a murder mystery kind of, And Then There Were None vibes. And she was like, you should write that first, which ended up being really great advice. So I started this book early 2021, and then I kind of like exactly a year later, I started querying. I met my literary agent and then my editor, and then from there, here we are.
So the inspiration for Those Who Drown, again, I kind of started it in 2020, and in the news at the time, there was a story about a cruise ship. I think it was called the Diamond Princess. It had been quarantined because of COVID, and I just remember thinking it must be awful to be stuck on a cruise ship just in the water. You can't get off and you're kind of trapped there with all these people, and I thought that would be a really cool place to set a horror or a thriller story. So originally it was more of an ensemble kind of thriller. Then I started thinking about what if there was a cult on board, and all of the things that happen. Like, I find oceans quite scary, and I started thinking about all the things that were underneath the water, like giant squid and things like that, and how could I kind of incorporate that. And then that's kind of how I came up with the book. And with regards to publishing, it was actually the fifth book I queried, I think. And I kind of had some slight success querying the book before. I'd had some, like, I think 10 full requests, but it was all kind of fizzling out. And so, sort of to stave off the depression, I wrote something new. And when I queried this one, like Alima said, like, it happened really quickly. So I got a call with my agent. I think we actually all have the same agent, Claire. But so that happened really quickly, and it was amazing and exciting. And sub was a bit longer for me. I was kind of at the end of my sub list, but Delacorte had shown interest, but they wanted me to do an R&R, so a revise and resubmit. And I did that, worked really, really hard. And yeah, I got an offer. So that was amazing, and it all worked out.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up setting, Amy, because I thought that when I was reading all of your books, I did think that it was interesting that you all have like a setting which has an expectation. So whether it be like a cruise or an island or a boarding school, whether that be an expectation of vacation or, school, it has expectations. And then you all kind of show the underneath of the expectations, kind of just flipping them on their head. And so I would love to know for those we drown and people to follow, both of you have kind of this locked room kind of setting, where they're incredibly isolated from everyone else. So I wanted to know, how do you think that the setting and the isolation impacted your characters? And then for everyone's thinking it, how did you create the boarding school setting as well in relation to this kind of, this notion of like expectation, I guess. So Amy, do you want to start, because you were kind of talking about it before?
Sure. So believe it or not, I've actually not ever been on a cruise. Haters are gonna be like, I knew it. But I couldn't afford to like just book a trip for research purposes. And especially when you're working as a teacher, like you can only take holiday in between terms, which is really expensive. So, but I did watch a ton of YouTube videos and TikToks where people were just documenting like their day-to-day life on a cruise, which was really interesting actually. And I made tons of notes. And honestly, like when it comes down to it, I think it is quite similar to describing a hotel, just more of like an isolated hotel. And I think really it's the perfect setting for a horror story, especially if it's like a transatlantic cruise, because, once you've left the port, there's nothing you can do. You're kind of trapped there until your next, port, wherever you're docking. And I think in Those We Drown, that kind of contributes to the horror, because Liv kind of realizes that, weird things are happening, but there's not really much she can do about it. So she puts a lot of it down to the fact that she's tired, or it must be her imagination, because these bad things, they can't, actually be happening. So yeah, it was kind of a perfect setting, and I think it really lends itself well to horror.
Yeah, I can talk next about the setting of people to follow. So yeah, similarly to what Amy was just saying, I think like isolated setting where everyone is kind of cut off from the world is perfect for thriller. Specifically, kind of where this came from was I was thinking a lot about reality TV shows, like specifically The Bachelor, which I unfortunately watch a lot of, where they like sign up for the perfect situation for like a murder plot, because they like turn in their phones. They're not allowed to talk to anyone outside. Like they can't even bring books or whatever, but like also they're being filmed all the time. So that was like a really interesting for me to play around with. This idea, like, you're willingly walking into this very isolated setting, especially for these influencers, like people who are only there because they know they're being filmed and like they want the exposure. So then when things are going horribly, horribly wrong, they still have all these hidden cameras around on this island in this like big fancy house, like, fighting for their lives and trying to figure out who I'm here. There's still an element of like, oh, is this actually being broadcast? Like they still have to kind of perform a little bit, these personas that they are always performing online. It's like also, of course, like the glamorous like private island setting juxtaposed with horrible things are happening at every turn.
With the boarding school, because so I went to boarding school, so in terms of writing characters at that age and that stage, it felt quite natural to do that. But then it's also because this story is quite it's a genre blend. I mean, the most neutral way of describing it is contemporary, like YA contemporary, but it does throw in a bunch of really interesting things, you know, with the mystery, romance elements, elements of thriller, things like that. So the setting lent itself to something so such a conglomeration of different things, because when you're at school, it's very much all of these things, and then a boarding school on top of that, all of these different things in one space, different personalities, different dreams, wants, expectations, and how everyone being together in this place can reveal a lot of things about what you, I guess, sacrifice because of those expectations, and what you almost can't afford to lose because of those expectations. So that's why the setting just worked really well, because ultimately, when you're that age, school feels like your entire world. And then when you're at school, in a school where you can't go home, it very much then is your entire world. So yeah, that's how that kind of influenced my choices on the setting.
We've talked a little bit about mystery, thriller, horror already, so I want to talk a little bit. So, all of your books are incredibly secret heavy. So, I want to know, how do you balance the reveal of the secrets with the pacing and also the character development? And if you had any problems, balancing all three of those juggling balls. And then I guess it kind of relates to sort of how do you draft in general. Olivia, do you want to start?
Yeah. So I think for me, with People Follow, what was really great about that writing process, that all of those things, like the secret reveals and the pacing and the character development, kind of because happen on this island in the book is that the sponsor character starts getting with the influencers and kind of telling them they have to vote on who is going to be canceled next. So as people start to get canceled, their secrets are revealed broadcast to the out world. So kind of that felt like that plot mechanism often would be like a chance for another reveal, which in turn is also like development in terms of like, what are these people hiding? What lengths are they willing to go to protect their secrets? Are they who we think they are? Yeah, so that was something really, really fun about this. My writing process in general, I feel like tends to be like concept, kind of like elevator pitch always comes first for me. And then from there, I go more into like, who are these characters? What is going to happen? And then we'll outline from there. And I find with thrillers, especially, like an outline is really important, just because you have to know like what's going to happen. Are we planting clues and red herrings and all of that? So yeah, usually I'll have a pretty detailed outline, and then from there end up drafting. In general, I think writing this one was just fun, just because of like how I felt like everything really came together in terms of like the pace of secret reveals, and I don't know, I just feel like every few pages something exciting happens, which is fun for me.
For me, like it was interesting, like which part of the question should I tackle first? Okay, I'll tackle the first bit first. So in the sense, with I don't know, like with the characters, and the pacing and sort of figuring out how to reveal things when it comes to secrets, because the heart of the story for me was the relationship between the cousins. I knew where they were in the beginning, I knew where they needed to be by the end. And so structuring the reveals and the secrets came around, for me, ended up being a thematic thing. It ended up being about what are the things these people need to experience to get to where I want them to be. And so it became about themes. And so each of the other, because it's quite an ensemble, which of the other characters can represent different themes that they can then come up against, that will then ultimately lead us to where we are. So those things ended up being tied to those individual people's secrets, and how I could use their secrets to sort of to sort of play against that theme, and how it would then drive us to the next beat. With the story, everyone's secrets come out at once in the beginning, but we end up kind of coming against them individually as the story goes on. In terms of actual like the drafting process, I'm huge when it comes to outlining across all the stories I try to write. So, you know, structuring the book in that way allows me to have a very straightforward and quite a clean drafting process, because all the ins and outs and the bitty work happens right at the beginning when I'm sort of outlining the story. And so the drafting process is more comfortable because I have a bird's eye view. And so ultimately, as characters I want to do, they start to tell me things about them as I'm writing through the story. If necessary, I have the bird's eye view, the sort of overview of the story that allows me to then sort of shift and tweak things and still keep sort of an intact narrative.
So for me, the whole balance of revealing secrets alongside pacing and character, I'm not gonna lie, it's tricky. It's, you kind of want to work backwards almost, by having like some, you have your big reveal and then you want to kind of seed it through the story carefully. Also, like with horror, I personally am a big fan of like events, scary things that happen that don't actually have an explanation. But my editor was not like vibing with that idea, so it was difficult. And I think especially with thrillers and horror, where you need to have these really tightly plotted, pacey stories to constantly keep the reader turning the pages, it is tricky to have all of those things 100% perfect. It's not easy to create like a page turning book. And with like the whole writing process, for me, I love drafting. It's my favorite because you just have that freedom where you can just be inspired by everything. And I'm an outliner as well. I think, like everyone else said, when you have books where you have reveals and twists and things like that, you have to outline them. Otherwise, you just tie yourself up in knots. So I'm a big fan of outlining. I find editing like quite tricky. For me, that's the hardest part, where you get your first edit letter and it's trying to rearrange so many moving parts to make them all fit and make them all work and not sacrifice, character and pacing. And so it is tricky. It's a challenge, but it is the dream. So
Yeah, that's the perfect segue to my next question, which was exactly, since we've talked about drafting, what part of the writing, editing, drafting, releasing, like what part of the book process as a whole gave you the most trouble, and what came the easiest? So Amy, since you said what came the hardest, do you want to share what came the easiest?
Yeah, I think drafting, definitely. I'm like an ideas person. I have like, constantly making little notes. Oh, what about this? Cost of this? Like, I have too many ideas, which is annoying at times, and not all of like loads of them are rubbish. But so yeah, I'm fine with like the ideas and things like that. For me, I do, it's the editing and making everything orderly and perfect. But yeah, I love drafting. I love being inspired by, music and, reading other books and things. And that for me, where you have that initial freedom, is just the best part.
Alima, do you want to go next?
I would say the hardest part is probably the thing is, for me, it typically depends on the story, but for this one, I would say the hardest bit was figuring out kind of how I wanted to. So there's two points of views in the story, and one of the characters was they attack their situations in very different ways, and I'm very different from both of them, like in terms of personality and sort of choices that I would make. But one of them was particularly more difficult than the other in terms of making clear and making sure that the reader understands where they're coming from. Because I understood kind of emotionally, and I guess on a kind of experiential level and things that I've been through, why someone would behave that way, but people who typically don't have that lived experience wouldn't get it. So I think for me, it's kind of putting on the page and sort of making it as understandable as possible, even if you couldn't really relate to it because you don't have that same lived experience. So I would say that would have been the hardest thing. The easiest thing, I would say there's specific scenes with a particular character that I always really enjoyed. And I would say drafting in general, those specific moments, I think would have been the easiest part, because that just came because I was like, I really want to explore this. But I won't be specific because of spoilers.
Yeah, I think for me the easiest, or I guess also within like the acting of the book, and really any, I think the hardest part is just actually coming up with like figuring out the mechanics of like what actually happened and like who's behind this, and just like coming up with the plot itself. But from the acting and was just like so fun for me that felt easier than I expected, just the actual writing of. I think in terms of like the entire book process though, the most part for me has been like the part where people have to read it and buy it, and like you have to market it, because something that has been kind of just like a wild like dystopian experience is like writing this book about like the dangers of influencer culture and like the dark underbelly of all that, and then I like have to get on TikTok to like sell the book, which has been like I'm to be used with that, and I'm learning to have fun. But yeah, I think for some of us, writing is such an introspective, like solitary thing when you're suddenly like, I share this with people. It's exciting, but it's also challenging to come out of our little writer shells.
I just want to remind you all, everyone watching, that if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. I want to pivot a little bit to talk in depth about certain things that I really enjoyed in every book. I want to start off in Those We Drown, since friendship is kind of at the core of your book, even though it's like this locked room kind of cruise ship horror kind of scenario. And so specifically what you do for your friends. So I wanted to know, how did you create and establish the background for their friendship off the page? Because they're friends when they arrive. It's not like you have to watch them become friends. So I would love to know about that process. Also for Will's character development.
Okay, so with Liv and Will, they've had they have one of those kind of, we've been best friends since primary school, like year one. I don't know what, like middle grade in America. So like, you know, they've always been together. Their mums are really good friends. So they kind of just grew up together. But then as they got older and kind of, you know, went into their teens, things became a bit more complicated. And I think, well, Liv was developing feelings. Spoilers. And there's like a night where they kissed, and Will ended up not wanting it to like ruin their friendship really, and didn't know how to handle that. So kind of in the story, he kind of begins to ice her out a bit. And then, so I think he wasn't, you know, being a bit of a dick on purpose. It was like he genuinely didn't know how to handle the reaction or the fallout. And so when they go on the cruise ship, this is the chance, Liv thinks, to like mend their friendship and get things back to how they were to begin with. And unfortunately, they run into the sirens who kind of influence him. On the first night, they have this massive row. He's really horrible to her. And then he disappears. So it's a really horrible situation for her to be in, wanting to mend this friendship and then having everything kind of, you know, taken away from her, not knowing where he is. So yeah, they did have that backstory, because I wanted, you know, the reader to understand why she was so concerned about him, especially when you see how he treats her that first night on the ship. So that was kind of the reasoning behind that.
Yeah, there's nothing like being trapped on a ship with your friend to really like force you to to really force you to work your problems out. For everyone thinking that your two main characters have very different approaches to how they survive in this like incredibly, I wrote this word, but I was like, I don't know actually how I say this word, homogenous, I think, homogenous school in terms of ethnicity and class. So I wanted to know, how did you want to use their varying different experiences from inspiration to explore the boarding school setting as well as their own identity throughout the book?
So a huge part, like as I mentioned before, like was about these two girls and their relationship. So, you know, they're cousins, so they, you know, they're related, they grew up together, that whole thing, but they have very different sort of backgrounds. Ianu is very much lower class, working class. Um, she's a day student because she can't afford to board. Um, Whereas, and she's sort of British Nigerian, so she's, you know, she's lived here since she was really young. Whereas Kitan, like they're cousins obviously, but Kitan is Nigerian, so she comes to the boarding school as like an international student, and she is incredibly wealthy, and Kitan is kind of in with the quote unquote popular people, whereas Ianu is very much she's comfortable being alone. She has one friend. And so the story is about them getting back together and sort of repairing this relationship after something really bad happens in the past. So for me, it was for me, it was just kind of showing how there is no one way to kind of handle such a complicated situation when you're very much one of the, you know, two of the few sort of Black students of color. But then when you come from these very different backgrounds, what choices do you make, right? What sort of mobility and choices and options do you have when you have more money? What can you do? How does desirability come into it when neither of you pass the paper bag test, right? So I think that was the draw for me, in sort of making these two characters so different, because then I was able to kind of navigate this space of sameness through two different lenses, because Ianu could go home, but once she was back at school, she was very isolated. Kitan is right there in the middle with all the popular kids. She has all the money. She can do all of the things, right? That's required of upkeep in that space, but she's away from home, right? So she can't. She's a border. She doesn't have kind of the cocoon of people who really care about you. So that was the draw for me.
Yeah, and I felt also that they're like both looking at kind of survivability and thriving, and like how it looks different for different people, and as you're saying, like how complex it is when you have all of these other factors being brought in terms of how it affects like what options are even open to you and how you can thrive and like survive and sort of like just make it to the next day essentially. um and in People to Follow, you have a lot of different character perspectives. And so I wanted to know, how did you balance these? Because they're hiding secrets from like everyone, from each other, kind of from themselves at various points in your story. And so how did you manage the reveal of who it could be versus what everyone else knows, and like these different levels of kind of what does anyone really know?
Yeah. Um, yeah, so just to like kind of explain a little bit about the multi People to Follow, because we do have 4 different narrators. There is Kira, who is a former child star from like a Dance Moms show, who now has like fitness content. There's Elodie, who is an Instagram model, kind of like an impulsive party girl streak. Max, who is a documentary YouTuber, who kind of has come to this island set on making his own so he's kind of filming everyone. And then there's Logan, who is a recently kind of maligned TikToker, because she was kicked out, maybe left her like house type content collective recently, and no one really knows why. So yeah, I think it was really fun to do this in a multi-POV way, to be able to balance everyone's secrets kind of off of each other. Because yeah, like as you were saying, like I think everyone in this is an unreliable narrator to some extent. They all are like things that they're keeping for themselves in some ways, things that they don't want everyone else to know. But what I so funny of it all is that we can see these characters both from their own perspective, but also from the perspective of the other 3 characters that we hear from. And also from like a secret reveal standpoint, multi-POV is fun because as soon as you get like close to something, you're like, oh, new narrator. So that also is, I think, helps in how we kind of like tease out secrets and who these people really are.
Yeah, I mean, I had more. I was writing that question and I was like, I actually want to ask more, but it is so spoiler related that I like actually cannot ask the second part of my question. So maybe I'll just like email later. Anyway, I want to also remind people, if they have any questions, drop them in the chat. I want to ask a little bit about side characters. I love side characters. So I want to know, who is your favorite side character, and also who would you have wanted to give more time to? Because sometimes you have to edit, and so sometimes maybe editing, maybe one ended up getting a little bit less time than you wanted. Amy, do you want to start?
Sure. One of my favorite side characters was Cynthia. Who is this cool girl who's really confident, really relaxed, and she befriends Liv when they first meet. Yeah, she's kind of, like the person you'd want to hang out with. And I'm just giving so many spoilers, but it's fine. So I kind of like her decision towards the end. She decides to become a siren. Which, these influencers who are glamorous, they get to travel the world and they don't age, and to become one, you have to make a sacrifice. And there's a scene where Talia, who is kind of the main siren, she offers to make Liv one as well. And it sounds really tempting. And Cynthia actually takes it up on offer, which I thought, go Cynthia. And it would be, I would have liked to have gotten more into her background and, why she decided to do that. But there's not always time, especially with the pacing and all those kinds of other issues.
I'm going to share next about people to follow and influencers on this island. We have our 4 POV narrators, but there's also 6 other people, and most of the characters in this book are like terrible, terrible people, which is fun. So I feel like I have new favorite side characters every day, but I think right now my favorites is Graham, who is one of the 3 members of Logan's former TikTok house, who, not a spoiler, really show up on this island to start drama Logan things, like cause a scene. But like this e-boy kind of like mare who is wanting to like set off on his own and like have his own music career stuff. And he's like he's in black all the time. He's like has his vape pen every 2 seconds. And he like, something that I thought was really fun about him is that like when things start getting really bad and like the bodies are piling up, but he's a little bit like, if I'm gonna die here, like I'm gonna finish my EP, which I is really fun. Also, like without spoilers, I can't say exactly who, but there are certain characters who are not with us for very long, who I had a lot of fun writing and wished I could write a little bit more of them.
In terms of my favorite side characters, I really like Ianu's younger sister, Faye, and then I really like Nav, who is Ianu's best friend. Who else? I think, I would say those 2. And then in terms of who I would have liked to spend more time with, Jordan, who is one of the kind of core 10. We've got the 2 POV characters, Ianu and Kiton, but there's sort of 8 other sort of core characters. But I would have liked to spend a lot more time with Jordan because he's going through a lot, but he doesn't say much in terms of what he's going through until the very end, for reasons that I will not spoil. But yeah.
I want to ask about the themes of sacrifice. So I think all of your characters have to think about what they would sacrifice for what they want. What are they willing to do? Who are they willing to betray? So I wanted to know, how did you approach their character development in terms of their motivations? And then what, in general, kind of what does sacrifice mean to your characters? Olivia, do you want to start?
Yeah, so something that I was really interested in just when like setting out to write people to follow is just this idea of like what it must be like for such like these 18-20-year-olds out there who like suddenly have platform and are like able to buy money that they're making on like YouTube or TikTok or what. Because on the surface it seems like, like being an influencer is not highest in the world, but I feel like sometimes for these people it really is like almost life or death, like the need to hold on to this huge influence that suddenly you have and this huge revenue stream that young has never experienced before. So I think kind of I was exploring sacrifice through that lens of like, these people will go so far to protect this thing that they have, because it does a little bit feel like, I would imagine, world, because I'm feeling this even as just a 25-year-old. Like, if you don't have your life figured out by the time you're like 22, and if you're not like on some path to success, it's kind of over, because then like Olivia Rodrigo is gonna come, or is this 18-year-old who like is suddenly so successful. Feels like a very high stakes thing, and I think especially in like a young adult novel, that was something I was really interested in writing about, just like what that must be like to have that experience blown up to such high stakes when you have like followers.
For me, it was more about community. That's where kind of sacrifice played a role with these two characters. Kind of finding a safe space, and how Kitov, for example, she sacrifices herself, right? So she sacrifices who she is and all of these things, that it's kind of like that thing of like, if we're going to save the world, there has to be something we save it for. For her, it's like, yeah, I want to live this great life, but if the person living the life is deeply, deeply unhappy, what is it all for, right? So with Kitan, that was kind of that was her experience of sacrifice. And sort of with Ianu, from the very beginning, like I say, she's alone, and the question becomes why. What has she sacrificed? What has happened to put her in that position? And so kind of coming back to each other and re-finding their community and re-finding safe space. And with Ianu, like, the photo, the secrets are, she's a photographer, so the secrets are written on like her photographs and sort of spread around everywhere. And she's blamed for it, but it comes at the cost and at the sacrifice of a community that she has outside of the school. And what that means, solving the mystery allows her to regain that. So that's how sacrifice and kind of community sacrifice comes into this, is through that need to re-find community and re-find a safe space.
And in Those Who Drown, I'm going to give up saying spoilers because it's been out for 6 months. So one of the themes is, well, probably the major theme is literally sacrifice, and it's thinking about if you are, in a desperate situation, or you're just a horrible person, what would you sacrifice? Like, how far would you go to get, power or beauty or money? And with Liv, things are a bit more complicated. She does, she's desperate to find out what's happened to her best friend Will, even though they've been estranged for a while, and even though he treated her horribly. And the last time she saw him, she still has this bond because they've been friends since they were children. So she's still, desperate to sort of risk it all, really, to find out what happened to him. Although I think throughout the story, she kind of does realize that she's ready to move on. She has this flirtationship with another person on the boat, someone called Con. So yeah, it's definitely a big theme in Those Who Drown.
So I want to ask a question about post debut. That's the second part of my question. The first part of my question is actually, what was some of the best advice you got for your release? But the second part of my question was, what's been an expectation about post debut, or post release, I guess, not post debut, which has proven untrue? Alima, do you want to start? Sorry.
So the best advice pre-debut, and then best advice. I guess being present. in every single thing that happens and just sort of taking it in, because you don't get to debut in YA ever again, right? And sort of, so that was the best advice. And in terms of things that turned out to be untrue, nothing really comes to mind, because I think for me, a huge part of the whole process has been just kind of going with the flow and just sort of seeing what happens, and when things happen, just going with it as they occur. So nothing, yeah, I can't think of anything that was really that I thought would be the case and then ended up not being the case. Because for me, it was more, and I guess that links to the advice of, being present. It ended up being quite, "Oh, okay, this is kind of cool. Oh, this will be fun," and just kind of going with how things went. So nothing turned out to be untrue for me.
For me, good advice was to celebrate everything, every success, and just try and enjoy it, which sometimes it hasn't been easy. I think you definitely need a thick skin or like the ability to, because you're kind of, I think as artists, we're kind of, exposing ourselves and we're all a bit sort of soft, and then you kind of just get thrust into the world and everyone can kind of, judge the work that you love, and it's hard. There's so much build up as well to debuting. There's so much time that you spend worrying, like, do I have enough people adding my book to Goodreads? Do I have enough graphics? Have I made enough book trailers? So actually, like when Those We Drown was released, it was kind of a relief because you feel like you've relinquished control. Not that I ever had that much control in the first place, but like now it's out there, and it's a relief in not being able to kind of affect anything anymore. And I think another piece of good advice is always just be looking to the next thing, and focus on the thing after that, and just keep looking forward. As for things that have proven untrue, yeah, like Alima, I can't think of anything specifically that someone said that hasn't been true. I think there's a lot of good advice out there for debuts.
Yeah, I really agree with everything that has been said so far. I think and like celebrating the little things along the way are both the things that came to mind for me. Really good advice. Just because I think like looking back on like when I was querying and like before I knew I was going to be published, I think it's really easy to start to like, because I'm gonna tell myself like, okay, if I can just get published, like that's the goal, that's all I need. And you're here, and it's really easy to let the goalposts keep moving of like, well, if I can just like do well enough to do this full time, like then I'll be good. And evil and toxic a little bit. So just kind of like stepping back, and even like before, if for everyone out there who's writing, like before you're even querying, just to celebrate the fact that you like wrote a book or are writing a, because it can be really easy to get lost in all of the stuff that comes after that. So yeah, just like being present, that like there's a book in the world that I'm really proud of, and that I hope and feel will find its readers. And just knowing that that's that.
Okay, I have a few lightning round questions. I want to know, first of all, if any of you have any books you want to finish before the end of 2023. So in the next less than a month. Olivia, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I did just yesterday finally get off the waitlist. And that's like my book this month. So I need actually to finish that this month.
Sorry. Like a book that I'm reading.
Yeah, that you want to finish before the end of 2023.
Yeah, I've just started Starling House, which I'm really excited to read. It's so good so far.
I'm reading Crooked Kingdom. So I've got about 16 chapters left, so I'm nearly done. And it's been good so far because I read the first book either earlier this year or this time last year, and I thought to myself, let's finally get back to the sequel and see what happened. So yeah, it'll be good to finish that before the end of the year.
Okay. I want to know, if you had to associate your book with one song, what would it be? Alima, do you want to start?
There's this song by Ray Black called Dark Skin, and that's a really good one. So I would say that if I had to choose just one, but if I can sneak in another song, I would say Super Rich Kids, Frank Ocean.
I actually don't. I did think long and hard about this question, but I don't. And it's weird because I do have songs that are associated with other books I've written, but maybe sea shanties, because when I was writing Those Who Drown, they were like really huge on TikTok at the time. So yeah, I did listen to quite a few of those. Get me in the seafaring mood.
I feel like I was also on sea shanty TikTok for a minute. That was a good time. For me, I think the first one that comes to mind is Heads Will Roll by the Yeah Yeah Yeah. It's just anything that's like a little bit about violence and murder, but like make it kind of like sexy, glamorous pop.
I want to know, and I always love asking this question, if your book ever had an alternate title, if this was always the title, or, what was your title journey? Amy, do you want to start?
Sure. So all of my books have been retitled. So clearly that is not a strength of mine. Originally, Those We Drown was called Ocean Dark, Ocean Deep. And then the publisher said it kind of gave them more like dark fairy tale vibes. So we cut it down to Ocean Dark, and that was how it was announced. But then it got changed again to make it sound more kind of fast paced and more like a thriller. So after a lot of brainstorming, we came up with Those Who Drown.
People to happened. Both of my, and sorry, my Wi-Fi has been really bad. I feel like I'm cutting out a little bit. Yeah, both my second YA that I'm working on and another work in progress, both of those, like the title has changed a couple times.
Yeah, no, title change. It was something else while I was drafting it. But for me, I typically have a working title. I'm not like seriously married to it, so I'm always like open to title changes. But this title, it was actually, the story of this title is actually quite funny because it ended up being my agent, our agent that figured it out. And because we were sort of going, sending ideas, me and my editors, sending ideas back and forth and just kind of saying, oh, does this work? Does this work? And then I can't remember who came up with something. Yeah, I think it was my editor. So Alessandra came up with something. And then we were like, okay, it feels a little bit too long. Let's try and figure out a way to shorten it. And it was Claire that was like, what about Everyone's Thinking It? And we were like, go for it. And that's what ended up happening. So yeah, very much a group effort.
I think that is a lovely sentiment to end our panel on, the group effort that is required to bring a book into the world. I have left everyone's books links in the description box below, so definitely please check them out. Holiday season is approaching. They make good gifts, just saying. So thank you all, everyone who was watching this panel. Also, thank you to the authors for spending their time with us and chatting with us about their books. I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.